And that's what climate change is about. It is literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
That's right, Greta. It is Friday, the most important day of the week, because it is the day the Heartland Institute broadcasts the Climate Realism Show. I'm Jim Lakely, Vice President of the Heartland Institute. There is nothing else like the Climate Realism Show streaming anywhere, so I hope you will like, share, subscribe, and leave your comments under this video. These all convince YouTube's algorithm to smile upon us and get the show in front of more people. And speaking of that, as a reminder, because big tech and the legacy media do not like the way we cover climate and energy on this program, Heartland's YouTube channel has been demonetized. So if you want to support this program, and I surely hope you do, please visit heartland.org/TCRS. That's heartland.org/TCRS. That stands for the Climate Realism Show. And you can support us and help us make sure that we do this program every single week. Any support you can give us will be greatly appreciated. And we also want to thank, as we do at the top of every show, our streaming partners, that being junkscience.com, CFACT, and What's Up With That. This show right now is streaming on their X accounts, and you should visit all of those websites for fantastic climate realist information every single day. All right, let's get rolling. Today we have with us Anthony Watts, Senior Fellow at the Heartland Institute and the publisher of the most influential climate website in the world, What's Up With That. We also have Linnea Lueken, Research Fellow for Energy Environment Policy at the Heartland Institute and the star of our Climate at a Glance video series, for which you just got a nice friendly email, right here on the Heartland Institute YouTube channel and on Rumble. We've released, I think it was 32 of those videos. We are done with the releasing of those, but we'll continue to use that wonderful information. Please check them out, and show them to your friends as well. It's a great tool to educate people. And we are also very pleased to have as a returning special guest, Dr. Matthew Wielicki, or Wielicki, or you can say it any way you want, he says. So that's okay. But I will call him Matt Wielicki. He's now a 2-time guest on this program. He's a former earth sciences professor at the University of Alabama, and now describes himself as an earth science professor-in-exile on his excellent Substack titled Irrational Fear. You should be checking that out. He writes regularly there for his subscribers, mostly on climate and energy issues, and he is enjoying the kind of freedom that he did not experience in academia at the University of Alabama, of all places. So welcome, everyone. We're going to have a terrific show.
Thanks, Jim.
So Matt, I think we had you on a year or so ago. We're so happy to have you back again today. It's going to be a lot of great stuff to talk about today. But for those who missed out on your first appearance on the program, maybe you can explain how a man in the prime of his academic career found it necessary to leave a pretty nice job at the University of Alabama.
Yeah, it was a tough decision, obviously, as you can imagine. It was a multiple factors that were involved. My wife and I grew up in California, and we were in the University of Alabama at the time. We were far away from family. COVID had hit, so we were starting to think about being closer to family. But one thing that made the decision a lot easier was this lack of diversity of ideas that I saw essentially evolving everywhere in academia. And I thought University of Alabama would be a little bit immune to that. I got my PhD at UCLA, so I was a little bit used to these things, but primarily in the social sciences, they hadn't really moved into the STEM fields as much. But after about 2020, I really saw this just rise of ideology in the STEM fields, and that revolved around things like DEI, but climate was one of the big ones. And being an earth science professor, I was a young father. I started to kind of think about things a little differently and talk to my students about some of their anxieties and what they're worried about and what their hopes are for the future. And I really got the idea that we were robbing the ambition of young people by telling them and selling them this irrational fear that the planet is on fire. And so I noticed I started speaking up about that, and it became very clear that that idea was taboo in academia, especially in the earth science community. You cannot have that idea and be an untenured professor and hope to get tenure. That writing was on the wall. And so before that essentially happened, we decided to leave. I have all the utmost respect for the university and the academic system. And that's why I speak out against it, because I think it's a really important institution in the United States. And just seeing the way that it's been moving, I had no place there. And so that's why I kind of consider myself a professor in exile now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was a tough decision, obviously. And, I wonder sometimes how many other professors have contemplated having to do something like that just to, protect their sanity and their professional integrity. Because as anybody who is paying attention knows, many of our universities today are not centers of higher learning. They're centers of indoctrination and dogma. And it's kind of scary, actually.
Yeah, I always told my students, I'm not here to teach you what to think. I'm here to teach you how to think. I'm going to tell you, the conclusions I came to and the evidence that I looked at, but challenge me and let's have a discussion. And, that was definitely not the way that the community wants to teach climate change, that there is a stick to a narrative and reject any evidence that goes against that narrative. And I just don't think that's the scientific method.
No, 100% not. So. Linnea, Anthony, also welcome to the show, obviously. If you have any greetings or questions you would like to have for Matt before we get rolling.
Well, I was just wondering, when it came time to make the decision about whether to stay or leave, I'm sure the food on the dinner table versus, integrity question came up. How hard do you think it is for many people that were in your position to come to make that decision? Because really that's what it boils down to. If you're at a university and you don't have tenure, you have the problem of either, supporting your family or yourself or integrity. It's a 50-50 bipolar kind of choice. How do you think someone would make that? I mean, how do they do that?
I think it's a very hard decision. That's why I have a lot of sympathy for people that are staying. And even though they may have, some qualms with what's going on, they kind of keep their head down. Self-preservation is a very big instinct. And when you've just busted your butt in grad school and then had a postdoc for a couple years and you've been making peanuts and you land that tenure track faculty position, it's pretty hard to walk away. I'm very fortunate that both my wife and I have a really good support structure with our family. They've helped us out immensely financially. We've made some really good investments. And so I wasn't as worried about that. That made that decision a little bit easier for me. But I completely sympathize with all of these young faculty members who are just as upset as I was and want to speak out, but just don't have that same financial support that we had, that we could actually do this. And that's why I try to talk about like these other alternative avenues of things like writing on Substack and having a YouTube channel. Or there's, just in the last decade, I think there's a new avenue to share information for faculty members that are frustrated, where maybe just a decade ago, they would be relegated to go just teach somewhere, in elementary school, and they wouldn't be able to spread their information. And so, there's another possibility. There's an avenue out there. I think Jordan Peterson, Brett Weinstein, people like that are good examples of that. And so, but it's a hard decision. And I was in a fortunate situation, but I sympathize with those people that you're talking about.
I have one more question, and that is,
Yes, sir.
and I'm going to ask this because it will obviously be asked elsewhere. How much did Big Oil pay you to stop being a professor and be a professional climate denier?
Just boatloads. No, I've never received. It's funny because I was one of the only earth science faculty members that was in my department that didn't get funding from any sort of like fossil fuel companies because I wasn't really in paleontology, and we had a big paleontology group. And so that's just inevitable because they fund all the graduate students. If you took that money away, we wouldn't have earth science departments, but because of the work I was doing was a little bit adjacent to that. And so, but that's the classic thing, right? And we're all rolling in the oil money, and that's why we're saying the things that we're saying.
Yeah, that's how you could afford that very fancy piece of scientific equipment over your
right
over there.
That little 4-inch over there that Anthony has an 8-inch.
Yes, let it not be said that this show does not fully embrace its nerddom. So, all right. Speaking of that, we are going to appreciate all that, Matt. Thank you very much. Like I said, we're so happy that you're here, and I know our audience is happy to see you as well. We're going to now start the show proper with Anthony's favorite segment, the crazy climate news of the week. We have a new drop for this. Hit it, Andy. Yes. Made that special just to make Anthony smile, which makes me smile. Okay.
If Bill Nye, the flaming guy.
Yeah. We'll have a few more. And if you like that and want to see more drops like that, please say so in the chat and in the comments under the video. So we'll try to have a lot of fun with that. So our first crazy climate news item of the week is a new video game in which you kill the climate deniers. This is from our friends at the Daily Skeptic. German broadcaster makes video game where you kill flying climate denialists. So the German state media broadcaster, Südwestrundfunk, we'll just go with SWR from now on. Thank you. Have used the mandatory license fees they collect from all German households to produce an astounding viral reality video game called Green Guardians VR. In this game, players shoot lasers at flying climate denialists to defeat disinformation and to save the planet. The trailer for the game includes, quote, a monologue by an anonymous fossil fuel villain from the Evil Corporation, EVIL. I kid you not. And that character is played by a popular German YouTuber, apparently. And he appears to have actual oil and not blood flowing through his veins. The subtlety. Great. And so you play this game in the, quote, near future as an eco-warrior and a member of the Green Guardians. You grab laser guns and blast away at the disinformation. You blast down a wall to show a dystopian reality that was hidden from you previously. And then you shoot down climate deniers in fossil-fueled aircraft. And the last big boss you defeat is apparently the CEO of the Evil Corporation. So we're going to start with you, Linnea. You're a pretty avid gamer. Does this look like fun to you? And is this going to be reaching the Gen Z demographic as the developers obviously hope?
Well, it's got whack-a-mole, it looks like. So that's, that's pretty high tech there. Yeah, no, this is just cringe. It's just pure distilled cringe. Actually, the best part about this is that they use like live action actors for the cutscenes and for the communications and stuff, which I was trying to figure out what it reminded me of when I realized that it reminds me of the game from the 90s, Command and Conquer Red Alert, which also used live action actors for cutscenes, and it was very campy and goofy and hilarious. Yeah, this is going to be terrible. I'm going to play it. I put it on my Steam wish list. As long as it doesn't cost me any money, I'm definitely going to give it a shot. It's in VR, and currently on the Steam page, it says that it is not keyboard compatible, but there is always a workaround. And if we are able to play it, I am going to record it and I'm going to share it with our wonderful viewers because it will be very funny.
Oh,
and that guy in the gold suit is
the
literally
reverse
me.
was true? Can you imagine if the reverse was true and somebody on our side made a game where we shoot down flying climate scientists like Michael Mann or something? Can you imagine the outrage that they would have?
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of the telltale or the underpinning of all of this, right? We can't have disagreements. One side is bad and evil, and one side is good and noble, and And that's just ridiculous. That's not science. That's ideology. So this is, it's so not surprising. And of course, they're targeting young people because they're easily swayed. And it's just sinister to keep like doing this and trying to manipulate young people into really just driving their anxiety. I mean, that's kind of what I was talking about before. I mean, it's just repeating over and over and over again. Thankfully, I agree with Linnea. It looks really lame. And so maybe it will just have a little backlash.
Yeah, I mean, if cringe could save the planet, we'd be in fantastic shape after the release of this video game. I mean, Linnea, as an avid gamer, you've played lame games. You've played games that like you thought would be good and were absolutely ridiculously and horrible, and you probably look back at them and laugh. Have you ever even attempted to play a game that looks this terrible?
Not unironically. maybe for a laugh with some friends, that kind of thing. They're I don't know, maybe when the game comes out it'll actually be amazing. It's pretty bad when your game looks worse than like the standard trial games that come with a VR headset, and Andy knows what I'm talking about. It's pretty bad. We'll see. Maybe it'll actually be great, but I would argue that there are other games that you could play for a climate alarm perspective that are better, because a very large amount of AAA games try to shoehorn it in anyway.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, right.
You can always find it somewhere.
Right.
You don't have to make a whole game. Let's just say I'm not thinking it's going to be rated super highly on Steam.
It is going to be a hoot though. So yes,
yeah.
I will. I'll pay for the game. I'll pay for the game out of my own pocket. I gotta see it. So between you, Linnea, and producer Andy, I'm sure we're gonna have some fantastic, exciting gameplay footage to show right here on this very program. And I think you mentioned that this game is coming out in the fourth quarter, so it'll be a while. It'll just be an early Christmas gift, perhaps, which would be nice. All right, let's move on to our second item, which kind of flows into our main topic today with Matt, why we had him on the program today. And this is an article from Jacobin magazine. Now, Jacobin is a proudly socialist publication, which is hardly mainstream, I suppose. But then again, socialism is going mainstream now. So maybe salad days for Jacobin are coming. They have a story titled "Obsessing Over Climate Disinformation is a Wrong Turn." They note that in Canada, I didn't know this until I read this story. In Canada, false environmental claims are now illegal. It's a crime. Congress has been holding high-profile hearings with titles like denial, disinformation, and doublespeak. Academics are convening conferences on climate obstruction. Environmental NGOs are making disinformation databases with lists of individuals and scientists and leading programs on climate disinformation. The Heartland Institute and everybody on this show are happily on those kinds of lists, I must point out. The Marxist socialist author of this piece points out that all of that stuff is great, right? But now that the Biden and Harris administration have shoveled what they said was $1 trillion at the climate movement's agenda, that seems high to me, but we'll see, that now it's time to focus on ratifying this policy victory for climate alarmism by explaining to people, say, the wonders of a heat pump at your house, right? And here's the trouble. They write in their story, the focus on climate disinformation sets up a negative feedback loop. Many members of the public question whether net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 is a realistic goal. People are worried about whether renewables can produce enough energy and what happens to the wind turbines and solar panels at the end of their lifespans. They worry about the unintended environmental consequences of building out the renewable grid. They don't think they can afford electric cars. And they often bring up the idea that addressing climate change is a way of funneling more money to the elites while hitting their own pocketbooks. And they write that these climate alarmists write, we need to listen to those concerns and then do something about them, not discount them as merely the product of disinformation. So, Anthony, I suppose this is a good thing. We
Yeah.
should be encouraged, perhaps, that a socialist magazine admits that the concerns that ordinary people have about the very negative trade-offs of trying to get to net zero are actually real and not some kind of big oil funded disinformation.
Yeah, the problem that we've got is that these socialists that engineer these ideas, like net zero, some of the alternate energy and so forth, they're not engineers. They are organizers, and so they think that this, oh yeah, well, wind is clean, solar is clean. That's the answer. That's as far as they think it through. They don't look at all of the long-term problems. They don't look at the problems of distributing the energy within the grid. They don't look at the disposal problem. They don't look at the maintenance problem. They don't look at the problems caused by weather. I mean, look at all the stories we've seen where, wind turbines have been shredded by a storm, or we've had solar panels bashed by hail. I mean, we don't see, with the exception of Fukushima, which was hit by a tidal wave, we don't see traditional energy sources being destroyed by the weather. Typically, it doesn't happen. Yeah, some power lines might get knocked down or something by wind, but we don't see wholesale destruction by weather of traditional energy sources. But with renewable energy, they're rather fragile. They are at the mercy of the weather, and the weather does affect them drastically to the point of destroying them. And so the reliability factor on these things is something they've really not considered. So all in all, we're headed towards an energy grid that looks like Venezuela if we keep this up.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that struck me, I mean, Matt, if you want to weigh in, I mean, it's one of the first times I've ever seen, and especially in a leftist publication, where they run down the list of very real and data-based and engineering-based concerns about going full net zero, and not just writing it off as big oil propaganda, but actual concerns that actual people have.
I found myself shaking my head up and down the whole time you were stating that. I was like, oh, that's very reasonable. Yeah, I'm concerned about that. Yeah, that's reasonable. Yeah, so it seems very normal to me to have these concerns. And this is really resonating with young people. This idea, I would tell them all the time, like, why is it that they don't want me to tell you what I'm telling you? Do they think that you're not smart enough to have both sides of this argument so that you can come to your own conclusion? Do you find that a little bit weary? And I always tell them, be most weary of the people that want to control information. And I was born into the People's Republic of Poland. And so I've been that's been hammered into me by my parents for a long time, that, the beauty of academia was the free exchange of ideas. And this control of information is very scary to me, and just reminds me of the whole reason that my parents left their homeland and took my brother and I with them and moved to this great country. And so it's very sad to see that this is happening.
Yeah, it's pretty strange. I would point out, James, that the website called Jacobin, if you look up Jacobin theory, it says the Jacobin philosophy is a complete dismantling of an old system with completely radical and new structure, is historically seen as one of the most revolutionary and important movements throughout modern history. Except that every time it's tried, it fails.
Yeah. I mean, just the word itself is very dangerous and revolutionary on purpose. It's supposed to be provocative in that way.
Yeah.
Linnea, you got some thoughts to share on this whole concept?
Well, I mean, not a whole lot that we haven't covered before, but the point that I've made in the past that still applies here is that we have a whole group of people in politics and in activism who are trying to plan infrastructure based around technology that either doesn't exist yet or doesn't exist in a economic form that will work for us. And so what ends up happening is we're seeing this with the utility companies, right? They make all these promises. Oh, we're going to, shut down coal because the state is wanting us to shut down coal. And then we're going to replace it with an equivalent or a overbuilding of wind and solar. And then when it doesn't end up looking like it's going to work out that way, they keep the coal online longer, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
If you're lucky. Hopefully they don't just shut it down anyway, which has happened in some states and it's not been good for them. the people that should be speaking up about this for the most part are not, and that's the part that bothers me the most, is the utility companies, with the exception of a handful that have sounded the alarm on the blackout issue. They are finally, or they are not speaking up about it, even though they have the data that points towards the issues that we're going to have in the future. And part of it is the censorship issue. They know that they're going to get, dragged for it by the media. So they just keep their mouths shut, but it's actually a danger to the grid and to our health, because, if you don't have electricity, you don't have hospitals, you don't have all sorts of stuff. So yeah, it's not good. And
yeah, I mean, the thing, we've titled this little bit on our graphic here on the screen, maybe the end of the climate censors are in retreat, and just looking at I was just struck by the notion by people who have spent so much energy and money fighting climate realism, to say that that the movement, the climate movement, is expending way too much energy and attention, combating disinformation, as they put it, on the climate. So maybe we're going to get a reprieve because we've been censored and shadow banned and attacked for just sharing science and data that puts the lie to the alarmist view on climate and energy policy. But the idea, whenever I see a story like this, guys, and so anyone can weigh in here, I think it's amazing that we are where we are in the public debate on climate and energy, considering the decades and decades and decades of nonstop, basically cradle to grave indoctrination on the anti-scientific alarmist attitude. And Matt, you know this better than anybody, because you've seen these young people flow into your classroom, and you realize that there's a lot of deprogramming that needs to go on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is probably one of the first generations that's really, it has been ever since day one. And when I had my young boys, they're 7 and 9 now, I could see even some of the first books that they had for just learning to read, like level 1, they would intertwine climate and very alarmist views in these things. And so that's why I have sympathy for these young people. I'll make fun of them a little bit. I think they can be useful idiots at times, but at the same time, I really do have some sympathy, because I think maybe I might be the same way if I had just been fed that information since I was born. And, so it's hard for me to blame them. But at the same time, we do have to start deprogramming. And I think COVID was actually a little blessing in disguise, because what was misinformation one week was the standard information 2 weeks later. And It really made young people go, wait a minute here. This term is being thrown around very loosey-goosey when it's convenient to try to shut down an argument. But obviously, these people aren't really concerned with this, because everybody jumped ship 2 weeks later and they all claim that the misinformation is now the truth.
Yep. Okay. Very well stated. Let's move on to our third item of our crazy climate news of the week. And this is a story from Bloomberg titled "A Global Cold Rush is Reshaping the Planet and How the World Eats." So they say here that a cold chain that delivers and boasts around 5.5 million cubic feet of refrigerated space, that's the size of 150 Empire State Buildings, in the United States, and 3/4 of the average American plate has spent some time in a commercial fridge. And now that's increasingly happening in the developing world. And so Nicola Twiley, the author of Frostbite, How Refrigeration Changed Our Food, Our Planet, and Ourselves, says this expansion of the world's distributed winter has wide-ranging climate implications. Yeah, I never really thought of a cold truck as a mobile winter, but I will now. And so she says, or this story says from Bloomberg, at a time when ice caps are melting faster than ever, the number of walk-in refrigerators is also expanding. And this cold rush has huge implications for the planet. So the article and the interview, actually a podcast, goes on, of course, to scold us, Americans especially, for throwing away allegedly 30% of our food because we overstuff our fridges in this land of plenty. And what we really need are smaller and fewer fridges. And if we ate less meat, which would be good, because cows, obviously, they say, are bad for the environment. then we wouldn't need as much refrigeration to keep that meat edible so it doesn't spoil. And then the author of this interview said, this was kind of the money quote, like, you really don't need to have a tomato in December. It's going to taste like nothing anyway. Just don't do it. Now, they can take my December tomatoes for my BLTs out of my cold, dead fingers. But I just highlight this, Anthony, as we often do, to show and showcase how the climate scolds have literally no limits on what they believe, how you should run your life, instead of you making those decisions, them making those decisions.
Yeah, it seems to me that the whole climate argument, no matter what it is, top to bottom, is all about taking something away. Literally, there's nothing about the climate change argument that has any good in it as far as the average person is concerned. Oh, things will be better if you do this. No, it's not about that. It's about taking stuff away. And this is the whole socialist thing. People are too well fed. They're too happy. They have too many things. So the people like the Jacobins, they don't want that. And that's what this climate scold is all about. Full disclosure, I have 3 refrigerators. Yes, indeed. I have our main refrigerator, the beer fridge in the garage, and an office refrigerator. Oh no, I'm destroying the planet.
We're obviously paying you too much, Anthony. We need to reduce you to no more than 2 fridges.
Yeah, right.
Seething with envy at everyone who has a chest freezer in their garage right now. One of our commenters, exactly. One of our commenters made a comment that made me laugh. I liked it very much. And he said, this is scurvy denialism to not have tomatoes in winter. Yeah, right. Refrigeration saves lives. And that's the beginning and the end of it. This is absurd. I guess I don't even know what to say. It's just such an out there thing to attack, but they've been going after our refrigerators with Energy Star stuff forever. And apparently that's not enough, because it's never enough, right? They just want you to have less, period. It's not, the climate issue is not the peak of their goals. They're not trying to change the weather. Actually, what they're trying to do is control every aspect of your life. That's the end goal. And I don't think it's ever been more clear.
Yeah, don't keep your tomatoes in the fridge. That's what makes them lose their flavor. You should keep them out of the fridge. But it's remarkable to me that this anti-meat movement that you mentioned a minute ago, Jim, because the environmental and sustainability has always been about upcycling, like taking things that we really can't use and turning them into useful things. That's a big part of sustainability. And to think that an animal that can take useless shrubs and grasses that are no use to humans and present a fire danger and turn those into micronutrients and protein that are enormously useful for humans, and to think that is somehow unsustainable is remarkable to me. That's the beauty of nature. And, and then they argue that we should eat ultra-processed lab-grown meats, where the science suggests those are about 25 times worse for the environment. It's like, the disconnect is remarkable.
Yeah, well, we need robots to replace cows. That's the deal.
Yeah, that's right. Labs and robots and Bill Gates making sure that it tastes right.
Right. Well, whenever we cover these sorts of items on the show, and we have lots of regular viewers that are hanging out in the chat with us, and they point out the obvious, that this whole agenda, this whole program, this whole mindset is never about saving the environment. It's not about lowering the projected temperature 100 years from now by 1/10 of a degree. It is about controlling the human population of the earth. And if you can control the energy supply, if you can control the food supply, what else do you need to control the population but those 2 pillars of what keep us all freaking alive? And it's just it drives me batty, because it's this mindset. I'm a libertarian. I'm the chairman of the Leave Me the Hell Alone caucus. I just want to be left alone. I don't think that's too much to ask. And these climate alarmists just see no limits in their minds into how they should tell you and force you to live your life. I mean, yes, you don't need a ripe tomato in December, but you don't need a lot of things. You basically need gruel, a bear. You can live in a cave and eat gruel and bugs, and that would be enough for you to survive. But you can't live in a modern free society when so many people feel empowered to tell you what you need, and whatever you want is irrelevant. We will decide what people need, and we had societies like that. Those societies were called the Soviet Union. Those societies are now called Venezuela, and the people are miserable, except for those who get to tell everybody else how to live, because they get to live the way they want, but we don't.
We don't want to be Venezuela. Get that through your head, climate alarmist.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, I'm sorry. I went on a little bit of a gym rant there, which is usually the my trademark on the In the Tech podcast on Thursdays. But
trademark that gym rant.
Yeah, I had to get that off my chest. All right. So thanks guys for that. So we're going to move on. Wait. There's we have a meme of the week. Andy, if you could put up slide 4, I'll try to describe it for our audio only listeners. It's an image of a iceberg, and on the top above the waterline it says climate hysteria, and then below the waterline it's actually Karl Marx and it's Marxism. And so
actually, it looks like he's wearing a tinfoil hat to me.
It does. But yeah, that point can't be made more. Can't be made enough that the climate hysteria agenda is really about Marxism, and it's not about science. For sure. So anyway.
It is a very convenient tool, right? Because it's everything: what you eat, where you live, where you work, what you consume. I mean, it's everything. So if you want to get involved in people's lives, I see why it's being exploited this way, because it's perfect.
Yeah, it seems the solution to every problem is Marxism. All of them.
Yeah, that's right.
Doesn't matter what the problem actually is. The solution is always Marxism. That's how that goes.
Yeah. I would point out, I think that given Marxism and all the things that, it's tried and failed, and thinking about East Germany and, the whole electric car debacle, I think what we need is for someone to develop an electric Trabant. Yes. I don't know if you know what the Trabant was. Matt, you know what the Trabant is?
I think I do.
Yeah, it is the car that was produced by the East German regime, when they were behind the Iron Curtain. And this car was like a two-stroke car run on a chainsaw engine.
Almost looked like a box.
It smoked. It was gross. It was badly fitted together. They just trundled down the road producing pollution, and they were horrible. And they were so bad, they were hilarious. And I see some of the electric cars that have been produced that have been so bad that are now defunct are just like electric Trabants, literally.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there hasn't been a single social society that has built a decent automobile. So that should tell you all you need. There we go. There's our Trabants. Yeah.
There's actually a Trabant aficionados group here in the United States that have imported these things and taken to car shows. And it's fun because people actually drove these things,
Yeah. That looks about as fun as a visit to the dentist, I gotta say, driving that car. So anyway, we have fun in free societies. They don't have fun in Marxist societies. That's pretty much the way it goes. All right, so let's get to the reason we have, and Matt was kind enough to come on the program today. So on his Substack, Irrational Fear, he has a piece titled "Beyond Climate Hysteria: Embracing Practical Environmentalism." So it got me thinking. It's a very excellent piece, and we'll share it here on screen. And everyone should definitely go read it and subscribe to Matt's Substack. It's worth doing, and it's also worth supporting him financially. It's very, you don't have to empty your bank account, but he would certainly appreciate a little bit of support. But it was his lead that really struck me, and I'll read that for everybody, and then we'll start to get into it. Matt notes that in the early 20th century, Theodore Roosevelt championed a form of environmentalism that led to the creation of national parks, wildlife refuges, protected forests, Roosevelt's vision of preserving vast swaths of land for future generations was driven by a deep respect for nature and a desire to maintain its beauty and resources. The contemporary climate movement, characterized by alarming predictions and costly technological solutions, contrasts sharply with Roosevelt's pragmatic and preservationist approach. Here, I advocate for a return to traditional environmentalism, emphasizing land conservation and practical stewardship over current climate hysteria. So Matt, I think that's an excellent idea. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about or explain what does a return to traditional environmentalism look like compared to what environmentalism is in the 21st century?
Yeah, so I mean, it's hard to say exactly what it looks like. It's probably easier for me to say what it doesn't look like. And it doesn't look like switching to lower density fuels. That seems to be the solution at the moment. If you look at how humans have evolved, we've evolved from low density fuels like woods and dung of animals for cooking and heating. And we've evolved that into more and more density rich fuels. And the movement now is arguing that we should shift away from rich density fuels to fuels that are very unreliable and low in density in terms of their power density. It's a little difficult to do a power density calculation with things like wind and solar, but it's doable. And so if your real idea about environmentalism is things like habitat protection and species protection and allowing wildlands to exist so species can move between lands, it seems crazy to me to make the argument that we should cover vast swaths of the planet with very low density solar panels and wind turbines. And that doesn't mean I'm against solar and wind. I think they have certain applications. I have solar panels on my roof, for example, because I didn't want to pay the exorbitant cost of electricity in Colorado. But, to pretend that we can make a base load, or we can support a society and the base load energy needs that we need all day and night, whether it's windy or not, and we can do that with low density fuels, to me suggests that we're going to take over enormous swaths of land. And that to me would suggest that Teddy would be rolling over in his grave, because his whole idea was to protect the natural beauty. And it just seems that we've gotten so obsessed with carbon that we're willing to sacrifice habitats and species to put up more solar panels and wind turbines just to say that we're switching away from fossil fuels without actually thinking about the long-term effects or whether this is doing anything that we really want. We're just blinded by this obsession with carbon. And unfortunately, it means that there's only so much that the environmental and the research community has in resources. And the obsession with carbon is sucking so much out of it that we're just kind of leaving a lot of real practical environmentalism, things that we could really do. The vast majority of the plastic that gets into the oceans comes from a handful of rivers in a handful of countries. We could address that very quickly, but we're just obsessed with carbon. And when I read what Teddy was writing about and his decree in trying to save national parks and wildlands, I wish we could get back to that, because to me, that's environmentalism. What we're doing now doesn't really help the environment as much as people claim. And in fact, in my view, there's a lot of cases where it's in fact hurting the environment.
Yeah, for sure. Anthony and Linnea, if you have any questions or comments on this,
Yeah.
but I would go ahead.
Well, I think one of the prime examples right now that's been in the news on and off, especially last summer, I think, is the desert tortoise issue, and and the right whale issue, right? So the environmentalists today, they claim to be worried about these species that are supposedly threatened by oil and gas development, by shipping, just normal transoceanic shipping, by people ranching cattle, anything like that. That's a threat to these animals. But when it comes to the desert tortoise, putting in or paving over a bunch of property and putting in a huge field of solar panels apparently has when they do their environmental checks on that, is not a threat to the desert tortoise, whereas ranching cattle is. The drilling and stuff that you have to do for wind turbines is not a threat to whales and disturbing whales, whereas any other kind of drilling is a threat to whales and disturbing to whales, or even just regular shipping or whatever is a threat to whales. That's incoherent, obviously, but it's because they don't really care. The once again, just like with the refrigeration thing, the end goal isn't really, save the animals. I really think that a lot of these people are cynically using the animal issue just to get rid of stuff that they don't like.
You mean like WWF and the pandas?
It's remarkable. Greenpeace was started to save the whales, right? And
Yes.
and one of their big pushes was seismic surveys for oil and gas exploration. The same seismic surveys you have to do to map the seafloor to figure out how big the foundation, how deep the foundation for the wind turbine will be. But for some reason, Linnea is right. One way it affects the whales, somehow the whales know that this is to save the planet, and it doesn't bother them.
Right. I mean, a friend of the show and a speaker at several of the Heartland Institute's international conferences on climate change is Patrick Moore. He's a co-founder of Greenpeace. He's a delightful Canadian. And he said that he had to leave the organization because he looked around and he did not see environmentalists. He did not see people who care about the environment. He saw an army of anti-humanists that considered the human race and the human beings as a plague upon the earth. And that was the big problem. And he's like, this is not what I signed up for. I'm out of here.
Biological Skynet. That's what that is.
Yeah. But
that's what young people think. They think we're parasites on the planet.
Yes.
I mean, they really do. And that's why some of these young women were in my class, and they're telling me we're not going to have a family because, it's like, why would I put kids on the planet? We're ruining the planet. I think we have to get over the fairy tale that humans won't have an impact on the planet, right? There's no animal on the planet that doesn't have an impact. When a beaver builds a dam, it changes dramatically behind there. There's a bunch of gophers that got to move, and right, every animal, any living thing has an impact on its planet. I agree, we should work to minimize that impact, but we have to pretend that we can somehow just have zero impact on the planet, or the only way we get that is zero population.
Makes you wonder if that's what they really want.
Yeah,
but,
the thing about the environmentalism is, I was very much involved in it when it first came out. When the Environmental Protection Agency was first formed by a Republican, Richard Nixon, I was all for it because they were solving real problems. Lake Erie caught on fire in 1969. That happened the same week as the Apollo moon landing. And it got a lot of press because the story was right next to a lot of exposure, right next to the Apollo moon landing story. So, they were solving real problems: pollution in rivers and creeks and streams, groundwater pollution, actual air pollution, through particulate matter and other kinds of actual pollutant gases. Those have all been solved now, for the most part. I mean, now they're going after microscopic types of problems like, PM 2.5, because, well, what else have we got? But now, since they don't really have that mission anymore of solving all those environmental problems, which were real, they're turning to carbon dioxide and the control mechanism associated with that. They're literally, the problem with the bureaucracy lives to survive. They've got to survive. We can't shut down the bureaucracy because we've solved all the problems. No, we have to keep it going. And so to keep it going, you have to find new problems, because if you don't have problems, you can't get funding. That's the whole deal.
Right.
It calls to mind. Sorry. There was a textbook, I think, that I had in either high school or middle school that was talking about like pollution. And I swear it was supposedly written in the 2000s, but the way they were talking about pollution in the United States, it was like it was written in the 60s. In the same chapter that it was talking about how dangerous our current industry is, I turned the page and they had a photograph of the canary study that was done in New York over time, or the finch study, I guess, where they had these little light colored finches that they had on display from, I don't know, their bodies were just saved for some reason over time. And they line them all up and you can see the soot from like home coal furnaces and stuff on the ones that they collected in like the late 1800s and stuff, and they get cleaner and cleaner and cleaner over time. And I even at that age, it struck me that, hey, this looks like things are getting better. It doesn't really look like we're destroying the planet more than we were 100 years ago. So I don't see what the alarm is here. Looks like we're doing a good
It
job.
reminds me of an old saying that if your funding or your job or your organization, right, if its existence depends on finding a problem, that you're going to find that problem. Right. I suspect the IPCC is never going to not find a problem with climate change. Otherwise, why would the IPCC have to exist?
Right. And of course, the mandate of the IPCC was not to find out what is happening to the climate. It was to measure the impact humans have on the climate. And so when that's your mandate, obviously that's where you're going to end up. But, before we get to Q&A, and we have some excellent questions from our viewers here in the chat on YouTube and Rumble. Matt, I'm 53 years old. I'm of an age that on Saturday mornings, I would see the public service announcement of the crying Indian, who wasn't really an Indian, looking at the garbage that was all over in our land and in the rivers and all of that. And people throwing fast food stuff at him on the road. I think it's actually pretty funny. But I was a Boy Scout. And I was, so I grew up at a time when environmentalism meant cleaning the land and the water and making sure that we're not polluting the air with actual pollutant, not carbon dioxide, which is not a pollutant. And whenever my Boy Scout troop would go to a state park for camping, it was the worst because they were the messiest. But we would form a line and we would always leave the campsite cleaner than it was when we arrived. That was just drilled into us. And so I considered myself an environmentalist. I cared about the environment. In fact, the founding president of the Heartland Institute, Joe Bast, was himself a dirty, stinky hippie. He lived in a biodome, a geodesic dome out in the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin, and yet he is has been for decades was considered enemy number one of the climate because of his position as president of the Heartland Institute. So at what point, I didn't really notice exactly when it turned. You were probably more plugged in with that. When did we go from that Theodore Roosevelt vision of making sure that we leave the condition of the earth better than when we inherited it to this negative doom and gloom, anti-science, propaganda war that we continually are engaged in now?
I think you can trace it with the evolution of the IPCC. I think if you look at the 1990 first assessment, it's relatively reasonable. It shows quite a bit of warming in the past, quite a bit of cooling. It shows modern temperatures much more within natural variability. It talks much less in sort of this rhetoric of alarmism and certainty. It's much more uncertain. But you can see as more policymakers and bureaucrats and money got involved, that's my hypothesis, that you started to ratchet up with each of these assessments as they came out from the IPCC, such that now what used to be, we should be concerned and, data suggests this, but maybe here's this. It's like, we know for certain that at the 1.6 degrees Celsius over pre-industrial, we're going to have 65 category 5 hurricanes. And, I would trace it with the kind of the evolution of the IPCC, unfortunately, and the kind of politicization of climate science. But you're definitely right that it's the rhetoric and the type of language and the type of what we used to think of as environmentalism has dramatically changed. I think young people think environmentalism today is gluing your hand to a street or throwing orange paint on a painting. They don't think environmentalism is going out and picking up some trash in your local neighborhood or going and exploring your local camp and cleaning up a little bit. Like you mentioned, we'd always do a little bit of trail work when we were out hiking. I was a Boy Scout as well. And so, to improve the trail a little bit. And so, there's real simple things you can do to be an environmentalist. It doesn't require, these grand things. Be in charge of the things you can control, your local environment, helping out your local parks, things like that. And and don't waste so much time on the things you can't control, like changing the atmospheric CO2.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Hey, Jim, I have
Yes.
a comment for you.
Yes.
You know, Jim, you talked about the crying Indian, commercial. I remember that vividly, but there's a backstory to that you don't know. That Indian was an actor. And in Hollywood, when you can't get someone to cry naturally, get them to think of something sad or whatever and cry naturally, what do? They put glycerin in your eye, and the glycerin slowly comes down, looks just like a tear. And that's what they did for that commercial. The Indian wasn't even real.
Yeah, I think he
in
was
terms of
Italian.
crying.
Anyway. All right, thanks for that. Well, let's so definitely check out Matt's Substack, irrationalfear.com. We'll take you right to it. And subscribe to that. I'm a happy subscriber. I get notifications in my inbox when he has something new up there, so I can go over and check it out. I encourage everyone else to do the same. But we have some questions, as we always do, from our audience, especially here on YouTube. And Linnea, take it away.
You got it. All right. Let's go to this one. This is from Chris Nisbet, who asks, has Matthew asked his colleagues what they think of the scientific method? Do they think their approach to opposing views follows it?
We've definitely had those discussions. I think I get a very different kind of story or answer from tenured faculty. Tenured faculty were like, hey, good for you. You should speak up and I support this. I'm even going to say a little bit of something too, as opposed to untenured faculty were like, ooh, I know this maybe is a little bit of propaganda. They're stretching what the science really says, but do I really want to stick my neck out about this? And so it kind of comes back to what Anthony was talking before, this kind of self-preservation. And so they're doing their best to stick with it as much as they can, but it's a scary environment out there right now for a young academic who's going to speak up against any of this stuff. So, I've got a lot of sympathy with them. They're trying to walk a real fine line, but we've had some of those conversations. They're definitely different between untenured and tenured faculty members.
Hasn't the scientific method really changed, though? I mean, it used to be you form a hypothesis, you do experiments and measure and, collect data. You analyze the data and then publish a conclusion. Now I think it's you have a conclusion, you write a grant, you write the paper to match the grant. Isn't that what it is mostly now?
Unfortunately, a lot of it is. We know this is partly because the funding institutions have taken ideological stances. So as someone that's applying to funding from one of those institutions, you're pretty much told right off the bat what they're going to fund and what they won't fund. And so right off the bat, you're just looking for data that will support their narrative. And that gives you a much higher chance of getting that funding, gives you a much higher chance of getting tenure.
Ass backwards.
I agree.
All right. Now we've got one from our good friend Doug, who has been a fan of Heartland for a long time, and we are good friends with him. He says, what do you think about the green wonder of the 25,000 megawatt offshore floating wind turbine project in California at a mere $1 trillion? Yeah. What I can say about it is it's likely to go similarly to how it's been going in New Jersey and other places on the East Coast. I can't imagine. And they've got even more whales over there in the Pacific. So who knows what'll happen there. But these ones are floating.
Money's been drying up for the North Sea ones as well.
Yeah.
I mean, the tide, I think, is turning, no pun intended, when it comes to offshore wind, because these things they're not practical. And they are also, we've covered this a lot. The one off Nantucket, the Vineyard Wind Project off Nantucket in Massachusetts. One blade off of one turbine has closed the beaches in the height of summer in Cape Cod and on Nantucket. And it's, if that's the result of just one mishap, having thousands upon thousands of these offshore is just, people are starting to wake up that it's just not a good idea. It just isn't.
Yeah, who would have thought to put a hunk of metal with a bunch of electronics in the middle of salt water would be a bad idea?
What could go wrong?
The interesting thing about energy, in its evolution. At the beginning of, energizing the planet, when we started out distributing electricity everywhere, it started out solving a problem and filling a need, right? There was never any government subsidy really to get electricity to people. The electricity generators and providers did that because there was profit motive involved. The only reason that wind power and solar power is getting anywhere is because the government is subsidizing, saying you need to do this. Take the government subsidies away, and the things are just nothing but giant, white whales.
I would not have the solar panels on my roof if it were not for the subsidies. So thank you for your tax dollars.
You're welcome. You're welcome. All right, you're off the show. This is your last.
Get him out of here. Yeah. Okay. Here's a question from Tom White. He says, I understand that COVID caused a 1/3 drop in car driving for about 2 years. Were there studies of the drop in atmospheric CO2?
Yeah, we actually have a publication on that at Climate at a Glance talking about that. Dr. Roy Spencer did an analysis. And bottom line is, it wasn't just cars. There was industry that was shut down and other things. And it was undetectable, completely undetectable.
Yeah, I mean,
right.
we're talking like decimal points change. Not
the Mauna
outside
Loa
of
Observatory
normal.
has got it month to month, and you couldn't even tell.
Okay, let's grab another one here. Here's one from our friend Doug, who says, what's funny is that we haven't yet to discover all the species on Earth yet. How can one even determine what is wildlife reduction? And Doug, what I would say to that is it's much easier for macro scale critters than like little, most of the species that we haven't discovered are going to be your little like insects and microfauna kind of things, or deep sea fish, that kind of thing. If you have a significant population reduction in something like, I don't know, just grab white-tailed deer or something, you're going to notice because we see them all the time. They're all over the place. They're relatively easy to count. But also it's important to point out that a lot of the extinction narrative is also talking about those little things, like the little bugs and stuff. Most of the time, the critters that they're saying go extinct are not going to be your larger, mammals and reptiles and stuff. And the ones that they say are going extinct in terms of the little insects and stuff, that's a lot harder to count. And so basically what they do is they take a section of property or a section of land and they grid it out, and they do seasonal counts of how many of that critter they find on that property. And then they track that over time. And there's a lot of variables in nature that can lead to those critters having left those zones that they're doing the counting. And they found in the past where they thought something was totally gone and it came back because it had just moved elsewhere.
Yeah, and just a reminder that extinction is the norm, right? 99.9% of all species that have been on the planet go extinct. So we shouldn't be surprised if species are going extinct.
Right. But as Matt said before, too, we should try to not be the cause of something's extinction. That's reasonable. But yeah, the Ed Reed says, I vote for the extinction of ticks and mosquitoes. Yeah, I feel you on that.
Here.
Yeah, Linnea, what you just said is really important, right? We should be striving to protect these species, but at the same time, we can't blame every species that goes extinct on us at the same time, right? Because it is a natural event that happens, but obviously we should be monitoring and trying to minimize our impact. But there seems to be a tendency that, right, if you see a species go extinct, oh, it's because of anthropogenic emissions, it's because of climate change. Well, I don't know, species went extinct in the past. And so deciphering natural extinction versus anthropogenic extinction is not all that easy.
To a large swath of the so-called environmentalist movement today, humans are the least desirable animal. We're the one that doesn't deserve any protection.
Right.
Okay, next question here. This is a good broad question from Kite Man Music, who says, can it be proved one way or another that carbon dioxide affects global temperature?
Well,
Wow,
the science is already pretty clear on that. Yes, it does affect global temperature, but it's minuscule. I mean, And there's still some arguments about it, about certain kinds of spectral reflection and so forth and so on. But yes, carbon dioxide does affect global temperature. The majority of the effect happens in the first 100 to 200 parts per million of concentration in the atmosphere. And then after that, it levels off. It is a logarithmic curve. And we're actually right at the top of it, almost at the top of it right now, where a doubling of CO2 won't cause that much more temperature increase. And the way I try to help people understand this when I give talks is to compare it to soup. You go to restaurants, you order a bowl of soup, right? You taste it. You think, it needs a little salt. So you add some salt to it. Taste it. Yeah, that's better, but you add some more salt. And now you taste it and you realize I've added too much salt. Well, even if you were to add more salt, your taste buds are now saturated to the effect of that salt. They can no longer detect more salt in the solution because they've already reached the saturation point. And that's kind of how it is with carbon dioxide and temperature. Once you get past a certain point and reach that saturation, near saturation point, adding additional carbon dioxide doesn't matter that much.
Yeah, and I think that we're actually going to have that data soon, maybe in a few decades as we monitor the radiation escape from the planet, and we get better information at that. And as CO2 continues to rise, we're going to actually have the numbers to crunch a little bit better what CO2's increase in the atmosphere is doing in terms of the long wave infrared radiation that's leaving the planet. And so I think we're actually going to be able to quantify that a little bit more. Right now, it's kind of more of a qualified statement than a quantified statement. But I think we're going to have that data. And I think if we see something dramatically different, like the long wave infrared radiation is decreasing dramatically and proportionally to as the CO2 is going up, we may have to have a different conversation. But if you look at the geologic
by that
past,
time, we'll be living in a socialist paradise.
Well, maybe. But if you look at the geologic past, I think Anthony's right that the surface temperature is relatively insensitive. Sometimes you have hot periods at low CO2. Sometimes you have glaciations at high CO2. And so there's so many other amplifying effects that are involved that the CO2, because it's an uncoupled system, just changing the CO2 doesn't guarantee you a result in terms of surface temperature.
Yeah, we'll have lots of time to have these conversations in the future gulags, where we're all there together, with not a lot else to do after we're done breaking rocks. So.
All we'll be allowed to do is mine for lithium and play that
right.
climate denier killer game.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, here's one from Above Us Only Sky who asks, with reports of global ocean temperatures cooling, is the climate alarmism game up if global temperatures start cooling by, say, 2030?
I mean, this is part of all these models, right? And so sea surface temperatures were pretty hot. We've had this enormous amount of dust coming off of the Sahara. It's actually been reducing our hurricane season. Some people argue that's actually been now cooling the temperature. Other people want to argue that the Atlantic meridional ocean circulation is going to shut down. That's going to cool the planet. I don't know. I mean, I just don't put a lot of faith in these models anymore. I just look at the observable data. And to me, the observable data suggests that we're all within natural variability. The sea surface temperatures, remember, those we have since like 1980. So, on a 4.5 billion year old planet, that's not very much data. So I tend to just kind of reserve my alarmism from these models and just kind of wait till I can see it in the observable data.
No wonder you left Alabama. An earth science professor with that reasonable has no place in academia.
Right, but if they claim victory, the funding dries up, and then what?
Yeah, we're gonna quibble with Ed Reed here. I don't think that they'll ever, if it starts cooling, they'll just say that this is an effect of global warming, and we still need to immediately install global communism, or we will we will all freeze to death.
Everything's a problem.
Well, did you see that greening is a problem now? Yale 360 came out and said, I was teaching just not 2 years ago, and we were talking about desertification was the biggest major problem in sub-Saharan Africa. And because there's nearly 1 billion people, this is going to be a major concern for the whole world's population. And now they came out and said, it's not really desert. There's not a lot of desert spread, but it's actually greening. But let me tell you why that's also a problem. So any fact that any observable data they spin into supporting the narrative. It was remarkable. I mean, that was a 180-degree flop.
Yep. And that's, it's the same thing with the ocean current stuff. It's the same thing with precipitation. There's always they win no matter what, because if it's changing, it's bad. And unfortunately or fortunately, it's always changing. Here is a question from Chris again, who says, this is about energy. How can reliable generation make a profit if it's only used to fill the gaps? Surely by hiking up the price, right? And I would say, the electricity cost data seems to indicate that, the more you rely on more unstable resources, the more expensive it is for grid maintenance, the more expensive it is when you have to purchase power from other states when your power goes down. It's not working out great.
Yeah, I agree. I think the data is pretty darn clear. EU is one of the best ones to look at, and it's pretty darn clear there.
I think that's it for our questions.
Well, there's one. Here's a comment I'm going to put up here because we almost covered this on the show today, and we will soon. But David Burton says, Anthony, after the show, please check your email inbox for emails mentioning Hassenfelder. That is a reference to the extremely popular climate scientist, YouTuber, Sabina Hassenfelder. She dedicated a video yesterday or 2 days ago upbraiding you, Mr. Anthony Watts, for supposedly being wrong about something that we'll get into next week.
It was about tipping points. It was about.
That's right.
I wrote an article criticizing the New York Times for talking about these tipping points that are supposedly going to happen. And I pointed out that the article itself was pretty much mush. They didn't have any definitive, well, the tipping point will occur here. They had all these qualifiers, may, could, possibly, in there. And I pointed that out. And she took exception to that and said that stop denying tipping points. Well, I would say to her, show me one that's actually happened.
There's no tipping point in the entire geologic record. I would take tipping points as much science as I take 6 feet apart.
Yeah. It's the whole thing is nuts. There's a belief that the tipping points are going to happen, and it all comes from that terrible movie, The Day After Tomorrow, where they talk about the AMOC shutting down and this giant swooping Arctic air mass comes down on Boston and New York, freezes the whole city, and they have to walk over snow and ice that's, a dozen feet thick and all this other rubbish. And from that, they think that tipping points are going to actually happen. And there's no science to support it. And as you point out, rightly so, there's not one damn thing in the geologic record that says there's a tipping point that occurred.
But it's a very convenient threshold to try to push more policy and say, oh, we're overshooting. We need to do more and more and more. It's very convenient for that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, David.
Thank you, David.
Yep. David said he emailed her and said that Anthony was right. We will actually reach out to Sabina and see if she would like to be on the show. I wouldn't put that chance extremely high, but you never know. And I think it's the kind of discussions we should be having about climate among people who disagree and can do so civilly, as actually she did in that video about you, Anthony. But we'll cover that for next week for sure. And I want to thank Dr. Matt Wielicki for being our special guest today for a fantastic conversation that we had. And be sure to check out his Substack, irrationalfear.com. Become a subscriber and you won't regret it. I also want to thank again our streaming partners, junkscience.com, Anthony Watts' What's Up With That, and CFAC. Thank you for helping to spread this show and to get it in front of more eyes. Always visit heartland.org. Always visit climaterealism.com. Always visit climateataglance.com. And we'll do it for today. I appreciate everybody who loves and supports this show, and we will talk to you next Friday. Bye-bye.
He's a lion, dog-faced pony soldier.